Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tenser, CEO of SpyderWorks, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Eric Ingram, CEO and founder of Scout, a US-based company developing orbital products and services to enable a new era of space safety and transparency. Like this video if you enjoy our show and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Eric Ingram, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So Eric, I was reading a piece you wrote about a week ago. So for the listeners, for the viewers, you've got an unbelievable background as an aerospace engineer. I was reading through it. Undergrad research and thesis research in experimental atomic physics, then your master's, optically transparent dual frequency patch antenna for use in microsatellites, not everyday stuff, work for the FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, and others. Now, with all of this unbelievable background in your area, what you wrote about, though, was a transition to becoming an entrepreneur. Now, I have been an entrepreneur for 30 of my 37 years in different businesses. It is not an experience that you can teach. And I know people try to teach it. I don't think you can teach it. So can you share a little bit about that? Because I think it's just a wonderful lesson for everyone.
Yeah, I've, for one, never been to business school. I was a business major in undergrad for one semester. So I've got that. My first job out of college was working at an asteroid mining startup called Deep Space Industries. I was like an entry-level engineer doing like grunt level systems development for CubeSat missions. Like I realized I was just a terrible engineer, right? Like my attention to detail isn't great. My math skills probably not up to par. And I'm not a big fan of just working on like one small thing. I am a generalist and I like having my hands involved in as many different things as possible. After that, I then went to more non-directly technical positions. So I was in the nonprofit sector as a leader for some organizations for a few years, and that's kind of where I developed a lot of my management skills, if you want to call them skills. Some of my experience there, and then jumped back to the space industry, working at the FAA. And while my title was aerospace engineer, a lot of what I was doing was like regulatory stuff. I was evaluating launch companies' ability to meet safety and regulatory requirements for their launches and their ability to protect the public. While there's technical know-how that you need for that, it was me looking at dozens of different systems and dozens of different applications of them, and that was a broad reaching experience that gave me basically a top-down look at an entire industry. That, and combined with having an entrepreneurial mindset, I've done a ton of things throughout my life that could be thought of as businesses, but if the IRS is listening, they weren't. And so don't worry, we're way past statute of limitations, and I made tens of dollars off of them, so we're probably fine. But when I started my company, I had no real business development experience. It was the first company I started, and we're 4 years into this, and every day is a new learning experience. And I'm now an expert in dozens of different things that I never wanted to be an expert in. I could probably pass the bar in a few states at this point. It's not something you can train, right? I think it's probably easier for an engineer to get into business than probably a business person to get into engineering. Not that both would be well suited for those things,
right?
But in terms of learning the skill sets needed, there's so many intangible and abstract skill sets and experiences you need for entrepreneurship that it's really difficult to capture that with any sort of class or degree or anything like that.
Well, and one of the other things you said was, and obviously you did the entrepreneurial lifestyle of debt and credit cards and all those things. And you did it because you said you knew it would be worth it. And I think that's critical because as entrepreneurs, people think of the word audacity and they think of it as a negative. And I think of it as a positive, as a real driver, because the truth is, if you didn't believe that this was worth it, you wouldn't be getting up in the morning to do it. And frankly, no one else is going to do it for you. And unfortunately, and I don't mean it as negatively as it might sound, but we all have those voices around us going, this is crazy, this is stupid, what are you thinking? And you just need to have that self-belief and causal belief that no, this is really important.
Yeah, and it's not a simple thing to do. One thing I tell people is to test their theories before they dive in head first. So as a background, I funded the company like the first year and a half of its existence, and went full time about 8 months into the company's existence. So I was working on it part time. I had to build up that conviction. I knew it was the right idea, right? I knew that we needed space sustainability options. We needed more knowledge of what's going on in orbit. We needed capabilities to make sure spacecraft can operate more safely, can perform more complex operations autonomously, and we need to know where they are. Those are all needs. And I know that there are technical capabilities that I could develop or my company could develop to meet those needs. The question is the market there? Because you need both sides. You need all three sides, right? You need the need, you need the capability, but you also need the money to make it happen. So you need the customer base, because a need without money is a donation. And then, a technology without a customer is just a science project. And like, you kind of need those three things working in concert. Just my experience in the space industry, from working in space stuff to working the launch side to working the regulatory piece, I saw the need, and I kind of was going to where I knew we would need to be. I knew there would be a few years of development, and I knew there'd be a few years until the market really materialized. So it's about getting ahead of the curve and being proactive about where the market will be. It's a gamble, but it's more of an educated gamble than it is kind of just diving in head first.
So tell us a little bit more specifically about the need, and what I mean by that is, what is Scout? What do you do? And who is paying you to do it?
Hopefully one day every listener will be paying me. No, just kidding. We're not direct to consumer, although maybe one day, who knows? So I'll start out with the need. Space is really crowded. It's really crowded today. And there's articles coming out every week about near misses and congestion in space and a new mega constellation that's going to get launched in the future. We will launch more satellites in the next few years in the entirety of humanity's history leading up to it. The way we currently track things in space is using ground-based radars and optical telescopes that look up at the sky and track the dots going overhead. And usually that data is delayed and not super accurate. And the way we do complex operations in space is usually with a human in the loop, because we rely on legacy systems in this industry, and we really have that failure is not an option mentality. There's a lot of caution towards new technology adoption. Scout is working on developing capabilities and services to better enable knowledge of what's going on in orbit, and better enabling autonomous operations in spacecraft. So we have systems that we've developed that are vision systems combined with our proprietary software stack that, when hosted on board customer spacecraft or our own spacecraft, allow them to become aware of their surroundings. We can enable autonomous relative navigation, either moving towards something or away from something, similar to like a Tesla's autonomous driving capability. And we're also developing something akin to traffic cameras for space. So watching what's going on in orbit, who's going where, if there's going to be an accident, what are the good guys doing, what are the bad guys doing, and trying to make sense of it all so that we can de-risk the orbital ecosystem. Because space is increasingly important to us as a civilization. Every day you interact with space, whether you want to or not. And as we go forward, that's going to become more and more the standard and the norm. If you look at most of our weather data and climate data comes from space. We do Earth observation that provides farming and oil information about markets. We have communications from space. We have internet from space, given Starlink and others. All of our GPS systems operated in timing systems. So all of our banking systems operate through GPS too, to track the timing of these exchanges. And all of that will just increase in volume and importance as we go forward. So we're working on making space sustainable and, trying to safeguard that ecosystem. So it's a level playing field for everyone, or at least for most.
Definitely a layperson here. Definitely something I never thought about, the notion of space being crowded. So with people launching things, satellites, whatnot, is there like an air traffic control to this? Do we know who's launching what when? Or do we really need, as you're saying, you compared it to the Tesla system, do you just need things up there to know where other things are and how to avoid them? Like never thought about that before today.
Yeah, it's a complicated question to answer. I'll start from the regulatory piece. There is no direct space traffic management system in place now, or regulatory framework that governs it. There's loose rules of the road, and there's common operation standards, but nothing that is in rule of law. And that is currently being stood up right now as we speak. Like over the next few years, those regulations are being written. On the flip side of that, we do have knowledge of when launches happen worldwide. If they're a friendly country, we know what they're launching and what it's doing. And we can track them via those ground-based observers, like I mentioned before. So we have base level knowledge of what's going on in orbit. It's not real time. It's not what you would consider high definition or high fidelity. While it works good today and has worked historically, it's not going to be capable on its own to sustain what orbit will be like over the coming decades.
Why is this important? I mean, you said before, whether we know it or not, space is part of our day-to-day lives. How? Why? And why, as an average individual, should I know this? Or am I impacted by it, I guess, is a better way of asking.
Gotcha. And as I previously mentioned before, weather information mostly comes from space these days through NOAA satellites. Your GPS helps you navigate, but also the timing system of those is connected to basically every internet-related system. So every financial transaction is timed and all of that. And that is usually coordinated via space-based platforms. Space-based internet is becoming more feasible and knowledge more regular. If you look at Starlink, if you look at companies like OneWeb, and Amazon is standing up their Kuiper program, it will be, one of the default means of internet access over the next few years, especially in remote areas or areas that are impacted by devastating events like in Turkey recently. Ground infrastructure is finite and is geographically isolated. Space-based capabilities can be applied globally. So I think you will see more services and capabilities migrate to space in the future. And that's not even getting into human space flight and space stations and all of that, which are coming. But I think that the everyday person won't have tangible access to that for some time. But that stuff is on the horizon too and is being developed. But in terms of your daily interactions, I'm just going to make up a number here, but I bet at least a dozen times a day you're interacting with something that is either directly communicating from space or came from space.
So you've got a partner in this, Sergio. Does he come from the same type of background as you, or is there a very different take on his introduction to Scout?
So I met Sergio actually while we were at Deep Space Industries. We were both in the same engineering team. Our paths diverged when, I found out I was a terrible engineer. He found out he was a great engineer. And so, we reconnected with Scout, in 2019 to bring this to life. His technical know-how combined with my conceptual and industry-wide knowledge kind of combined to make that, a great combination. And the team we're putting together, wakes up every day with its desire to make space more sustainable. And we've really, made it ingrained in our purpose as individuals and as a company that, we're ultimately doing this for the good of everyone, even if it, we try to make it as altruistic as possible because we know that this is crucial. Like the infrastructure we're putting in place today is vital towards safe operations in space, towards complex operations, and towards sustainability. And, Sergio is helping that develop with the technology and capability he and the engineering team are bringing to life. And the company as a whole is moving this all forward. And we're trying to make sure that others in the industry and others outside of the space industry are aware of these needs and what's going on. And, we can bring everyone along with us.
So switching gears a bit, I mean, just a little bit though, but I mean, what is SpaceSight? What are the benefits to that technology?
SpaceSight is one of our avenues of our capabilities we're developing. So we have a proprietary computer vision, machine learning, and guidance, navigation, and control software stack that enables the self-awareness in space of these vision systems.
Mm-hmm.
And along with those capabilities, we developed synthetic data generation, or if you're in the defense sphere, they call it digital twin capabilities now, that allow us to make high fidelity understandings of what different systems we'll see in space. SpaceSight is dipping your toes in those capabilities and allows customers to essentially say, okay, if we have this set of optical capabilities in space on orbit, what can we see from it? And what data can we get at different distances, different orientations, and things like that? So it's a modeling tool for optical visual sensing in space. And dives into, or dips your toes into our capabilities, which we kind of bucket in 3 categories of see, learn, and act. So see is taking in information via sensors. Learn is taking that data we've collected and processing it to understand what we're seeing and what the data is telling us. And then act is decision-making based on that. So if it's relative navigation, it's how do we move towards or away from something. If it's space domain awareness or space traffic management related, it's tracking an object, what's going on around that object, and if there are any threats or issues that are coming about from the interactions of that area of space. Yeah, SpaceSight is a representation of some of those capabilities.
And just again, for my benefit, what speeds are we looking at? I mean, this is not 60 miles an hour, I should say 40 miles an hour on a highway. I mean, this is incredibly complex.
Yeah, things in orbit are moving fast, up to, I think 17,000 miles an hour, something like that. Things happen quickly, but, all things are governed by orbital mechanics. So we do at least have physics on our side. And the good news is things like direct head-on collisions with something where both are going complete opposite direction, and it's, incredibly rapid within a ton of energy release from that collision. That's super rare. That's very rare unless it's intentional, I will say. The good news is the vast majority of interactions happen at a much slower pace. Still quick, still a bit faster than what would happen on the highway, but most things that unintentionally interact with each other or might collide. And in the space world, we call that conjunctions, is when there's a chance of collision. Mostly it's things that are in adjacent orbits that are kind of drifting towards each other over time, right? And so those sorts of things are easy to diagnose and avoid. And then when you're talking about satellite servicing or working alongside another satellite cooperatively, usually you are in very similar orbits, and your motion relative to the other object is mostly stabilized. So you're dealing with fairly small interactions and movements to make those things happen. Granted, that's all relative, so I don't want to make that seem like I'm speaking in absolutes there, but trying to at least simplify it a little bit.
Okay, it sounds like there's a lot up there, a lot unexpected up there, and it's just incredible to start thinking about in our daily lives. We look at how hard it is to go with self-driving vehicles. It's pretty much still not there, from a technical or technology standpoint. And what you're describing, the speeds and the environments, is just phenomenal, actually, to listen and understand a little bit more of. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's good. And fortunate thing is we don't have pedestrians in space yet. So probably fewer obstacles we have to worry about than on Earth, but still a lot of things that are on the
no pedestrians and no birds.
Yes.
Astro Access.
Yes.
How does space accessibility spur innovation? So love to hear about that too.
Yeah. So full transparency, I have a physical disability. I use a wheelchair. I was born with my disability, and I've always been a space nerd and wanted to go to space. I've applied for NASA to be a NASA astronaut twice, knowing full well I was going to get denied. Selfishly, I want to go to space. But luckily, there's a lot of other people that do as well, especially with disabilities. And what Astro Access is working on is making spaceflight accessible to everyone, so that when you get the opportunity to go, the physical barriers or similar barriers aren't in the way stopping you from going. Financially might be an issue, but we're not touching that part. But when you're able to go, you don't have to worry about, can I access it physically? If you're blind, how do you navigate? If you're deaf, how do you communicate and receive information that is vital to you? Mm-hmm. And so Astro Access is working on testing and proving those things. We do parabolic flights on the 0G airplane, nicknamed the Vomit Comet. It does parabolas like this, and we have brief stints of weightlessness where we can test things. So, for instance, I've flown 2 flights with them. In the second one, my primary experiment was entering and exiting analogous spaceflight seats, because a lot of the concerns of spaceflight companies is, okay, if you have a disability, a physical disability, or if you're blind, will you be able to get in and out of the seats in time so that it is safe for that trip? And so, my focus on that flight was buying down that risk. And so me, another person with a physical disability, and 2 visually impaired persons all went through this experiment in microgravity, and all successfully were able to enter and exit the seats. And we now have the data to show that. And so that's, one example of dozens of things we've been testing in order to buy down that risk and come up with solutions to make sure that everyone is just as able to go to space and be just as useful in space. In some instances, we're finding people with disabilities are better able to operate in microgravity. So people who are double leg amputees, for instance, can maneuver in microgravity extremely well, because in space, your legs are kind of useless and mostly get in the way. So if they're not there, you're able to maneuver a lot better. So those are interesting things we're finding and testing. I could dive into a myriad of other things we're working on, but there's a lot of moving parts there for sure.
That's so one, I want to understand the adjacency a little bit more, because when I think of space, and yes, I see people who are there for longer periods of time and they're maneuvering outside of a spacecraft, but I think of it as mostly brain generated, like how bright you are, how well you think under pressure, that type of thing, which to me makes a physical disability less of an issue. And I might be completely wrong with that, but I don't know. I just equate space and space exploration with incredible thinkers. What is the maneuverability? What is moving seat to seat adjacent? Why is that relevant? Is that in case of an issue, or I don't quite follow?
Yeah, I'll kind of dive into 2 things there and let me know if I forget anything. But historically, the space industry is operated in the right stuff mentality of NASA during the Apollo program and the programs before it. Everyone there were fighter pilots, right? And they were intense missions. They were figuring things out. They were at the cutting edge, and everybody had to be peak physical form to conquer these new worlds and new extremes. We're not there anymore, right? Like, we have an orbiting space station that is primarily used for research. We're developing new and exciting technologies every day in space, and the need for you to be like, a decorated fighter pilot just to be an astronaut is just not, it's a resume. It's not the only resume. Okay. And I think that, entities are coming around to see that. For instance, European Space Agency just announced their para-astronaut program, and their first selected para-astronaut, which is, an astronaut missing, he has a single leg amputation. So they're already looking into the future as far as that's concerned, and other agencies I'm sure will follow. As far as the entering and exiting the seat, so if you go on a suborbital space flight with a company like Blue Origin or Virgin Galactic, where you go up, you get about 6 to 8 minutes of weightlessness, and then you come down. When you hit weightlessness, you're usually allowed to unbuckle and float around the cabin, look out the windows and all of that, experience, all that space has to offer. But then when you get to the end of that free floating period, you need to secure yourself in the seats before the gravity comes back, because it could be bad if you're re-entering and you're not strapped in and all of that stuff. And it's a liability, or a perceived liability. And so the thought, which to the normal person would be probably a normal thought, is, oh, that person with a disability, can they even get back in the seat? What's the risk of that? Or the blind person, will it even be able to find their seat to get back in it? And so a simple question like that provides a large amount of doubt. And so being able to empirically show with data, with video footage, here's the seats that look just like yours, here's people with these various disabilities able to enter and exit the seats in short amount of time in microgravity, right? It's a very simple thing to test, a very simple question to answer, but one that carries a ton of weight with it. And so that's why that specific experiment was super important to moving this project forward.
As you describe that, I can't help but thinking that if that can be resolved in an extreme circumstance like space, I'm hoping somebody's taking those learnings and bringing them back to Earth, if you will. I mean, it just seems like if you can resolve it there, then boy, you can apply it day to day and help millions of people with your learnings.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, the stuff we develop for space isn't just for space, right? It's for Earth. The water reclamation systems and the environmental processing systems on the International Space Station can be used anywhere. The efforts we're working to grow vegetation, plants, fruits, whatever, in space, in harsh environments, can be used in harsh environments on Earth. Okay. So I think it's a bit of a, I don't say misnomer, but a bit of a kind of falsity to think that the stuff we're developing for space is purely for that. And I will say the reason why we're focusing so much on spaceflight specifically is because we're at the very beginning of human spaceflight. And if we talk about humanity being around for tens or hundreds of thousands of years, whatever, we've only been traveling to space for the last 70. And so we're at the very cusp of the beginning. So we have the advantage of being able to design things from the beginning. We're not fighting against hundreds of years of physical infrastructure and buildings built with staircases and all of this stuff. And we're not having to retrofit, which is a much harder task than designing from the beginning. So we're seizing this opportunity where we can bake in all of these universal designs from the get-go and not have to retrofit things. And I think that is something that draws us to this. And the things we're figuring out for spaceflight are certainly applicable for Earth as well. And so the thought processes we're using and the experimental tactics we're using can be utilized for a ton of different things terrestrially. And, we are investigating ways that we can use the research we're doing to better things on Earth specifically as well.
Well, Eric, thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing it, these stories. And as this episode of Say Hi comes to a conclusion, just what's ahead? What's next up for Scout? What are your immediate sort of goals?
Yeah, so Scout is working to be the number one provider of in-space space domain awareness data. And, we're doing that by getting these products out there. We've already developed customer relationships with the government. We already have a lot of interest from commercial customers, and we're working to grow. In addition, we're hiring, so check out our website. And we have a lot of exciting things we'll be announcing around the corner. So stay tuned. We have a lot of things coming together, and it's a really exciting time to be not just a part of Scout, but the space industry writ large. And to the normal consumer of this podcast who might not want to work or be in the space industry or whatever, pay more attention to space. It's more important to you than you probably realize, and a lot more is happening in the space industry than just SpaceX launches. And just know that launch makes up about 5% of the space industry. So there's a lot of things going on once you look under the hood there that I think a lot of people should explore. There's a lot of exciting things happening, a lot of opportunities for jobs and new companies and everything in between. It's a really dynamic time to be in the space industry, and everyone should be as excited about it as I am, hopefully.
Eric, thank you so much for your time, for your passion, and for sharing today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.